Aloha Kako, and welcome to another edition of the Kanaka Express. I'm Kali Gumapek, your host, and again, mahalo for letting us come into your home with another special edition. And I'd like to welcome my guests tonight. I have my guest, Dexter Kayama, who is a practicing attorney here in Honolulu, and we have Dr. Keanu Sai, who is our resident PhD who specializes in political science. And tonight, we're going to be talking about several things, but I'd like to start out with a show that was broadcast on PBS, I think it was July 18th, and it was Insights. And this is a show that's hosted by Dan Boylan. And attorney Dexter Kayama was on that show. And also on that show was former Governor Waihee, Senator Clayton He, and Esther Kayama. And the show was excellent. And most importantly, there was a lot of information that was talked on and presented on that show. However, there was some information that was presented, but because of the format of the show, there were some points that really did not get, talked about enough. So we're going to try to fill in some of the pukas tonight. And, I'd like to turn to my guest, Attorney Dexter Kayama, and ask Dexter, you were on the show and you were awesome, I got to say.
Mahalo.
It was right on, what you were doing and all the information that you were able to provide. You were on the show and being asked questions and so forth. What are some of the points that you feel that you would like to add?
Okay, and mahalo, thank you for inviting me to the show. And first off, before I go into that, I would say probably both members on this show tonight, yourself as well as Dr. Sai, know much of the information that I spoke about on Thursday night show. In fact, Dr. Sai has his thesis, his PhD in this area, so he's the expert when it comes to this information. Secondly, I would say that we're all Ohana, but Esther's not my relative. She's not a Kayama. She's a Kia'aina. But still, anyway, yes, the thing about the format of the show, of course, we have 4 members there. Myself, Senator He, Governor Waihee, and Esther, as well as Dan Boylan. So when you're talking about a 1-hour program, it's difficult for anyone to get really in-depth information about the topic that we discussed.
Yeah, it was about Kana'i Olavalu, and it talked about Kau'i Noa and the Royal Commission.
That's correct, right.
Yeah.
Well, essentially, the theme of the show was, are we any closer to Hawaiian self-governance? And of course, both Esther, Governor Waihee, and Senator He, of course, all support the nation within a nation or federal recognition. And I happen to be the lone opposing voice talking about why it's unlawful to go that route and why the lawful route, of course, is deoccupation. Again, though, probably maybe 10 minutes worth of information I was allowed to provide with the other 4-member panel. So, again, difficult to get all the information out. So I tried to be as concise as possible.
Yeah, and it was clearly stated that I think it was 3 against 1 or something like that. So we're kind of leveling the field on this show tonight, So let's go ahead and talk about some of the issues that were brought up, that night.
Well, I think, and first and foremost, and what the theme of my discussion I thought would be is that we have information now that wasn't available before. We have documents, we have evidence, we have expert witness that wasn't available previously. And this information basically is earth-shattering. It changes the paradigm. It gives us a whole new outlook, and in fact, the correct outlook on what our process should be. The supporters of a nation within a nation status at this point either don't know the information or refuse to accept the information. And that's why they continue to be, in my mind, humble opinion, stuck in their unlawful process. There, of course, may be other reasons as well. I don't know if I would attribute it to the 3 other panel members, but of course, many of them already have some personal self-interest or some other kinds of connection to government, including United States government, that keeps them from being unbiased in this approach. So that's just my outlook on things, my perspective on things. So, but I think the information, I think it's important that Dr. Sai is starting to spread this information throughout our communities, and our communities become more and more informed and more aware. As I mentioned on the show, that as this information becomes more available to our Hawaiian community and the community in general, I think the nation within nation and federal recognition, they have a difficult time. We move further and further away from that process to the lawful process of deoccupation.
Yeah. Kind of, maybe you can expand on that, the nation within a nation, and that concept, because that was brought up 20, 25 years ago, and that doesn't apply anymore.
Yeah, I mean, Dexter hit the nail on the head. It's information that's now coming out. Now, in the past, the question might be asked, well, why didn't we know this before? There's actually a reason. There was a clear history, a documented history, that articulates everything that we are talking now today, in the 1890s, okay, early part of the 1900s. But soon thereafter, it slowly is being relegated to obscurity, and it's being effectively replaced. In fact, the national consciousness of a country was basically obliterated by a process. So when we say we didn't know, it's true, we didn't know, but there's a reason why we didn't know. Yeah, we call that Americanization. Now, that was a shock for me as well, looking at this information, because it's undeniable. It's there. It's clear. Clearly, the United States has no claim over Hawaii. There's no treaty of annexation. There is no treaty. All we have in the history books and in the law books is a joint resolution. A joint resolution passed by Congress annexing Hawaii. The problem with that is it's not the annexation aspect, but rather the process by which they're claiming annexation took place. And that process is by virtue of a joint resolution. Now, a joint resolution is a congressional piece of legislation. Congress passes two types of laws, joint resolutions or bills that become acts. Both joint resolutions and bills that become acts are limited to U.S. territory. So the United States could no more annex Hawaii in 1898 by passing a law than the United States can annex Canada by passing a law. It's really that simple. But why did we know that? That's pretty clear cut. It's very simple. But what has happened is, once America took over Hawaii, they began a process of indoctrination. Okay? And that's a very strong word, indoctrination. Yeah? Well, they actually started it. And they utilized the territorial government to carry out the plan. And that plan, the evidence of it is we have a program of patriotic exercises that was brought out by adopted by the Territory of Hawaii Board of Education. Okay? If we can get a picture of that on the screen, people can actually see what that looks like. And this program for patriotic exercises, as people can see on the screen, basically provided three programs or three formations where the students, which are in the public schools from 1st grade to 8th grade, will be carrying out. They will be saluting the flag. They will be saying in unison, one country, one flag, one language. They would say, I'm an American. They would sing patriotic songs. This is my grandparents' generation. Okay? This is 1907. Now, what is amazing is the parents of these children all knew that Hawaii was not a part of the United States. And when I say they knew, the newspapers reflect that. There is clear evidence they knew that a joint resolution cannot annex a foreign country, and they were saying that Hawaii is still independent. But how did they silence them? They silenced the parents by indoctrinating the children, their children.
Probably those same parents also were signed the Ku'e petition as well.
Absolutely,
Right.
Absolutely.
You know what was so amazing in that show that night was that the other guests that were on the show would admit that the overthrow and all the things that took place were illegal. But yet they said, but yet we still have to get past that and accept that there was a, with the U.S. Congress passing these laws, we need to move past this illegal act that took place and let's move forward.
But I think the illegal act that they're speaking to is speaking to the indoctrination that has already taken place.
Right.
So it's not that they understand the illegality of the act. The illegal overthrow has now become the buzzword. People say illegal overthrow, illegal overthrow. Some people don't really understand that, till today. They say, okay, well, the overthrow is illegal, let's move on. So again, that's, I think, an extension of the indoctrination. People have been led to believe something that's not true. Now, what I wanted to also follow up before we get beyond this point was to share with the audience that Harper's Weekly magazine sent a reporter to Hawaii to do a story on the indoctrination. Okay, and they came to Hawaii in 1907, and Harper's Weekly magazine did a story, and this reporter visited Kahumanu Elementary, or Kahumanu Public School, Kaiolani Public School, and Honolulu High School before it turned into McKinley High School. Okay, and this reporter actually documented the indoctrination, wrote about it. It said at the Kaiolani Elementary, with the command by the principal, the teacher yells, "Attention," and 614 school children begin marching in unison. Now, if we can show the picture on the screen of the children at Kaiolani Public School saluting the flag. And it basically says, we give our heads and our hearts to God and our country, one language, one flag. This scene shows the salute to the American flag, which flies on the grounds of the Kaiolani Public School, which has many Japanese pupils. The drill is constantly held as a means of inculcating patriotism in the hearts of the children. Now, what's interesting about that use of the word inculcate, by definition, is indoctrination through repetition. That's blatant. Now, these are our grandparents saluting the flag, and all they're going to be taught, the Star-Spangled Banner, the presidents of the United States. That's called denationalizing the inhabitants of an occupied territory. That is profound. Now, what we are dealing with today, and what you might say Dexter was on the panel, all of us there are actually an extension of the indoctrination. And every one of us are either ahead or behind each other in learning what really happened. So I think what Dexter was engaging with was really, to what degree do you know what actually happened? And it was clear Dexter knew a lot more than the panelists.
And that's why you mentioned the fact that even though they all agreed it was illegal, there was an illegal occupation, an illegal overthrow, they can't wrap their mind around the fact that then where do we go from there? If it's an unlawful status, how do we proceed with the occupation? They skip a whole bunch of steps.
Yep.
So there's a disconnect, and they feel that the only way that's available to them is the nation within nation or federal recognition status. I think to a certain extent I would agree with Keanu that that's a period of time of indoctrination that they may still have some difficulty breaking.
Yeah.
And the belief that the vote of statehood is still legal, and so this is how they have to, that's what the path that they're following.
Yeah.
What we do when I teach this in college, when we answer someone's question, like the question would be, what is the Royal Commission? And they ask, do you think the Royal Commission is good or bad? Okay, as a teacher, I don't want to give my opinion that it's good or bad, because they may have my opinion, but I want them to understand what is the Royal Commission, which is also known as Kana Iolovalu. Okay. Now, the way I would explain it is, okay, let's understand what is Kana Iolovalu, the Royal Commission. So that would be considered what is called Act 195. Okay. So Act 195 is a legislative act passed by the state of Hawaii. Okay. What created the state of Hawaii? Trying to get the students to get into this. What created the state of Hawaii? The United States Congress in 1959. The United States Congress the United States Congress then, can they pass laws that have any effect beyond the borders of the United States? And when they said, no, they can't, because according to the United States Supreme Court, they can. So if the Statehood Act is limited to U.S. territory, then what is the answer to the Royal Commission? And the response would be, it's irrelevant, because it has no effect in a foreign country if you start to connect the dots. Now, when you start to teach that, you're getting people to understand not just the term, but also understanding where did it come from, the act itself. So you give more depth into an explanation versus giving an opinion. Well, I don't like it. Well, if you like it or you don't like it, guess what? It still doesn't apply here.
And that's why, Dr. Sai gave a much better in-depth description and explanation right here in this show. I didn't have that kind of time. But so in the limited time that I had, I basically was able to take them from point A to point B, which is there is no treaty of cession.
Right.
Because there is no treaty of cession, the state of Hawaii cannot exist. If the state of Hawaii cannot exist, then Act 195 is unlawful. So it was I understood that I only had a limited period of time, so I wasn't able to give a full explanation. Tonight's show, of course, gives us an opportunity to give a better explanation, but that's how we got from point A to point B on the show.
Well, actually, Dexter, you did explain it that way when I watched it. So you actually did say, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Being the attorney yourself, as you are, you have to connect the dots. See, and that's what people need to understand. This is not a political issue. This is a legal issue. And some people can't distinguish between what is law and politics. Yeah, because some people think politics is law and law is politics. Actually, by definition, they're very different. Okay? Law are rules. That's all. Rules. Fixed rules. Politics is the social relations that people have within the rules. Okay? So with politics, you employ power. And power is the ability to get somebody to do something they wouldn't normally do. So you rally the troops to support a bill that may become an act. That is the process by which politics will change a law, or amend a law or create a law, okay? But law is law. So I heard on the panel, well, we shouldn't bother ourselves with the legal process. We should talk about the political process.
Yes.
That doesn't make sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because the political process is the process of social relations, and a lot of times what you utilize in politics is rhetoric. Rhetoric is trying to get people to believe something. It's very argumentative. It's swaying the masses. That's why they say politics blows like the wind. It may be trade winds tomorrow, Kona wins. That's politics. But you know what the rules are. The rule is that's north, that's south.
And and thank you because tonight's show gives us an opportunity to explain, because I know Esther and John, Governor Wahei, tried to refocus the attention, not on law, which it should be, which is where the primary focus should be, but starting point on politics. Respectfully think my position is they have it backwards. It is the understanding and the compliance with law that should form our political movement,
Right.
And the other thing they talked about, and they were trying to infuse the idea of our conditions, our poor conditions, and feeling that we could best address it by federal recognition or nation within a nation status, when quite frankly, really, I think the best way to address both our social, political, and economic status is through the Hawaiian Kingdom. So we best address all of those concerns through deoccupation and restoration of the kingdom. So then we have complete control over everything.
And when we say the Hawaiian Kingdom, I mean, there's so much confusion out there because you mention kingdom, people go, which one? We're talking about a country called the Hawaiian Kingdom. It started off with the Kingdom of the Sandwich Islands, turned into the Kingdom of the Hawaiian Islands, which became the Hawaiian Kingdom. So 1893, what happened between the United States and Hawaii was a situation between the United States and the Hawaiian Kingdom, a country and a government. And that government was constitutional, okay? Or should I say, is constitutional. Now, when we speak of the laws that apply, you have to speak to something that you can falsify. And when I say falsify is, if you can't falsify it or show that it is false, it is, okay? Now, when you speak to law, you're getting into terms such as presumptions. Okay? Now, presumption is an important aspect of these laws because under international law, a country that is an independent state, there is a presumption to their independence until proven extinguished. Okay? The presumption lies in the country itself that has the sovereignty, not in the country trying to get it. Okay? So whenever you talk about a presumption, and Dexter knows this, the legal term for presumption is every presumption is rebuttable. Okay? Meaning the presumption is this until you rebut it with evidence. So the presumption of innocence, when somebody is being prosecuted, you are presumed innocent until evidence shows you're not innocent. But the burden is upon the prosecutor to rebut the presumption of your innocence. What has happened here is a lot of people tend to think that it is Hawaii that needs to prove its existence as an independent state. It's actually it's the reverse. All you need to verify is what was Hawaii in 1893, and yes, it was an independent state, stated by Secretary of State Walter Gresham. President Cleveland even said, a state,
Right.
okay? They said it. So if it is a state, then Hawaii is presumed to be an independent state. It is the United States that has to rebut the presumption. There is nothing there rebutting that presumption, except our own people who are speaking through indoctrination in believing that this is America. So it's almost like the reverse. You got to prove the kingdom exists. No, you're supposed to prove the U.S. exists here. It's the reversal. And with the evidence, it provides the basis to shift the paradigm. So now the burden is not upon Hawaii to prove its existence. It already exists. The burden is to prove it doesn't exist. And that's also what takes place in the courtroom.
The other thing is that you've always used this analogy, and I really like this analogy, that of which Kanai'olavalu and the continuation that Waihe'e and he and Esther continues to use is playing the football game with baseball rules. Okay. And because Kanai'olavalu is a race-based program, because you have to be, quote, have koko in order to qualify to get into Kanai'olavalu. Okay. And so it was exclusive in order to qualify, in order to get onto Kanai'olavalu. And if you didn't sign up, you wasn't included in this government, so forth and so on. And everybody else was also excluded from becoming part of this government. And so it was very, very race-based oriented, okay, of which the racism of this was humongous, okay. And Dexter was trying to explain that to everybody, but I don't think people really got the magnitude of saying, according to U.S. Supreme Court laws, and this came down with Rice, why the Hawaiians got nailed to begin with, that all these laws that the United States said was okay at the beginning with Hawaiian homes, 50% Hawaiian blood, you qualified, oh, I get 50% Hawaiian blood, now I'm going to qualify. Then Office of Hawaiian Affairs created that. Ceded lands, oh, got to get 50% Hawaiian blood, or I got 50% Hawaiian blood. Then from that point on, with all the programs, we had to prove Hawaiian blood. Now the U.S. Supreme Court said, that's all race-based, it doesn't work. Kanai'olavalu now comes along and says, you have to have Hawaiian blood. They're continuing to perpetuate that race-based lie. And you came on and said, cannot. Hawaiian Kingdom was inclusive of everybody. But yet, you got Waihe'e and Kanai'olavalu is now saying it's exclusive, it's a club. We're forming our own club, of which it's a race-based issue.
Well,
Well, I didn't have to address
Yeah.
the race-based issue on it because, again, I was trying to be clear, and I thought I was clear, that they had no lawful status
Yeah,
anyway.
it's illegal anyway.
It's illegal. So the United States had no claim over these territories. And so any of the enactments that they try to impose on us, of course, are also unlawful and invalid. So including Kana'e'oluwalu. But I do agree with you that Kana'e'oluwalu is a race-based legislation, but it doesn't apply to us because it's unlawful.
Right.
So that's the position I was taking. Now, I think with respect to the historical analysis and everything leading up to the overthrow, I think I was able to get everyone on the panel to agree with me. There was no dispute concerning the historical, the factual and legal basis of our kingdom up to 1893. I think where John and Esther and even Clayton is that I don't think they can really explain how we get from there to federal recognition from that point. And again, it makes it more difficult when I keep reminding them about the unlawful status, and to which they don't disagree. Now, one other point, and I thought I'd like to give Dr. Sai the opportunity to explain at one point, explain further. At one point, Dan Boylan was talking about how the passage of time may have impacted things. And I tried to explain to him, in fact, how the passage of time actually doesn't reduce the claim, in fact, because the United States has no lawful claim. And we talked about the idea of prescription. And I have some basic understanding, and I know how to operate under those kinds of terms, but I know Dr. Sai is the expert, so I'm going to have him, to give him the opportunity to better explain to our audience the idea of prescription.
You know, so the facts show that there's no treaty.
Right.
And that's a given. That's undeniable. That's a falsifiable statement, which cannot be falsified.
Right.
Okay. So there is no treaty. Okay. There's a joint resolution. And we know U.S. laws have no force beyond the borders of the United States based upon U.S. constitutional law. And international law prevents that from happening. Yeah. But U.S. law prevents it from going beyond its territory. Okay. Right. Now, when you speak about international law then, could there be a way for one country, a sovereign state, to acquire the territory of another sovereign state without a treaty? See, that's a question that needs to be thrown out, which I've addressed in my dissertation and my research. But we got to think about that. It's not just one track. We need to understand international law. So international law, there are basically the three ways that apply to Hawaii regarding it being a sovereign state. How can Hawaii's sovereignty be extinguished? See, that's a question that needs to be answered, okay? So the United States will claim, as it appears, they're claiming that they have Hawaii and its sovereignty, okay? Now, three ways to acquire sovereignty on the part of the United States, which would have effectively extinguished Hawaiian sovereignty. The first is conquest, yeah? You can actually go to war against the country, and back in 1890s, if you take out the government, okay, you can actually claim that country for yourself. Now, some people might say, yeah, Hawaii was invaded, 1893, U.S. troops. True, invaded, but investigated by the president, and then apologizing to the Queen for the invasion and negotiating a settlement to restore that government. So that is not conquest.
Right.
That actually is, oops, sorry. We made a mistake. You know, our ambassador kind of went off the handle. We need to make reparations. We need to restore the government. That's very different.
Right. In fact, they basically say in the documents that it was unauthorized use of military force to interfere with the territorial sovereignty of the Hawaiian Kingdom.
Exactly. So it shows that they are adhering to the presumption of Hawaiian sovereignty.
Right.
Yeah. So they're adhering to it. They're not trying to rebut it. They're going, no, they're a sovereign state. So conquest doesn't apply. Okay. And in 1898, when U.S. Congress passed the law, they actually disguised it as if it was a treaty. That's not conquest. Okay, there was no invasion. People just moved here and took over. Okay, it's called trespass. That's called occupation. So conquest doesn't apply. So the next would be cession. And a cession is to convey. Now, a cession can be done voluntary or involuntary. So the United States has two examples. An example of voluntary and involuntary. Involuntary cession, but yet still by treaty, is by conquest. So that's where conquest is not taking over the entire country, but may take a part of that territory of that country. And you need to get a treaty from that country who has title to transfer it. And that would be the 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. that ended the Mexican-American War. That's when the Rio Grande became the dividing point. Okay. Now you have another example of cession, which is voluntary, the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. France negotiated with the United States to cede the Louisiana territory to the United States for, I think they negotiated roughly $14.5 million. And that was roughly the amount the United States paid for Mexico to transfer. Even though it was a conquest, they actually compensated. Okay. So you have two examples of cession, voluntary, involuntary. Well, we don't, that process doesn't apply to Hawaii because there is no treaty, right? There were two attempts, but there is none.
Right.
Okay.
And that's undisputed.
And that's undisputed.
Right.
The final way that you can acquire territory without a treaty and without conquest would be acquisitive prescription. Acquisitive prescription is very similar to adverse possession. Okay, so adverse possession, you have 20 years, and if you occupy a part of the territory or property of a person or persons, and those persons sleep on their rights, they make no move to get you out, they make no move to oppose your stay, and after 20 years, you have a claim to quiet title. Okay? So adverse possession, if you get past the 20 years, that doesn't mean you have title. That means you have a claim to title. And what you need to do is initiate a judicial process, and it's called quiet title. It's a quiet title action. Once a decision then is made in your favor, that decision effectively takes title from the ones who possessed it and said you slept on your rights, and gives it to the one who was claiming it through adverse possession. So you have a difference between what is called a claim to adverse possession versus a title by adverse possession. Okay? So for the United States, adverse possession is looked upon at the international level as acquisitive prescription, which is peaceful display of sovereignty in the territory of another country, and that country does not say anything. Meaning they're going to sleep on their rights, and by sleeping on their rights, they're basically acquiescing to that situation. Okay? Now, for a country to lay claim against another country, remember, you're going against the presumption of title. They have to go to a tribunal to perfect their title. And you have arbitration tribunals that dealt with that in the early 1900s and latter part of the 1800s, which is right around our time frame. The United States has not gone to perfect any title because they've been claiming they had Hawaii by cession, but yet there's no treaty. But because of the indoctrination, we were led to believe there was a treaty of cession. That's why today we say ceded lands. Cede comes from the word cession, implying there's a treaty. There's no treaty. So the idea of acquisitive prescription, I'll give you two examples. And these two examples or court cases dealt specifically with the United States. In one particular case called the island of Palmas. In 1898, Spain ceded Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines to the United States as a result of the Spanish-American War. Okay, the Treaty of Paris, 1898. And they got everything that Spain had in those territories. Now, Spain claimed those territories by discovery, in particular the Philippines. Okay? Now, when the Governor General of the United States went to the Philippines after the treaty, he noticed a Dutch flag was flying on the southernmost island called Palmas. Okay? The other name for it is Miangas. Okay? And a Dutch flag was flying. And he said, wait a minute, what is that Dutch flag doing here? It should be an American flag. And they said, no, we have title here, and they're claiming title by prescription. But they didn't perfect it yet. So they went to arbitration. So here the United States is in a position where the Dutch have to prove, they got to rebut the presumption against the Spanish claim, which the United States acquired. The tribunal had determined that Spain could grant no more than it had. So the question was not the United States claim over the island of Palmas, but rather the Spanish claim. And what the court determined, the arbitral tribunal, what it determined was that island was not contested to by the Spanish authorities, even though the Spanish laid claim to that area by discovery. So from 1677 until 1898, no claim of contesting title. And that was
So the Dutch
221
flag had been
years.
flying all that time.
And they were claiming that that land belonged to the Dutch East India Company, which today is now Indonesia. It never was Spanish, but that is when the United States had to go to court, try to, say it's not. Well, the court ruled against them. It is prescription. That's a successful claim to prescription, which is 221 years of no protests. Okay. Now, another case that involved the United States is where the United States themselves are going to claim prescription. And that happened in the early 1900s, and it's called the Chamizal Tract Arbitration. And in 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo that ended the Mexican-American War, that treaty identified the middle of the Rio Grande as the boundary, okay? As the boundary between the American states and the states of Mexico, okay? Because actually Mexico is actually the United States of Mexico. They're actually a federation just like the United States. So this particular issue is going to rise in El Paso. So you have El Paso, which is the American city, and across the river you have Juarez, okay, the Mexican city. The Rio Grande River naturally began to move after 1848 south into Mexican territory, thereby creating 600 acres of dry land on the El Paso side. American citizens from El Paso began to build homes. The United States now was put in a position to perfect the title, because it was presumed to be Mexican, but they got it perfected because American citizens are there. So they went to arbitration. And what the arbitration determined was it refuted the claim by the United States to prescription because protests were filed by Mexico. And once one protest is filed, that precludes prescription because it's supposed to be peaceful, that you slept on your rights. Because if it's forceful, then you're entering into the law of occupation and the laws of war. Yeah.
And that's why my point at the show, and I tried to say everything he said within a 3 or 4 sentences. So I think I covered most of it, but again, the idea is the time period hasn't passed. Hawaii has made many protests against the United States claim, and because of that, the claim for prescription cannot be successful for the United States.
Well, what's also important too, and like in our case, like in the Mexican case with the Chamizal Tract, it also said that it is not required for the country that is being usurped to continue to protest for fear of retaliation because you may start a war. They said one protest was sufficient in light of the situation. Oh. So for Hawaii, the protests were able to be made by our kupuna and our queen.
By the queen.
Now, what we did after, because of the indoctrination, that's just survival. That can't be used against the Hawaiian Kingdom for not continuing to protest. If anything, that's the evidence of why protests weren't continued, because we were indoctrinated. So these issues that have happened since 1898 do not serve to strengthen any claim the United States may have. If anything, it only qualifies the Hawaiian Kingdom sovereignty. Because what's important to know is that it's the United States that has the burden to prove they have title here. And if they're going to claim prescription, they got to go to a tribunal to get it. And if you go to a tribunal to get it, you got to bring in the other party that has title to the sovereignty that you're trying to get. Well, you overthrew the government in 1893. Who's over there? It's like me trying to quiet title action. I want to enter a quiet title action, and I'm going to have open a lawsuit just with me and it claiming I was there. No, you need to have the other side to determine whether or not the criteria is met. So again, we're caught between the United States is caught between a rock and a hard place. You cannot make a claim to title to Hawaii in light of Hawaii already being independent, because the presumption is still there. That's important.
And I just said they don't have a lawful claim. And that, I summarized that because, of course, the lack of time. But that's what my position was. They don't have a lawful claim, and the rightful claim, the lawful status is the occupation of the country.
And it's important, and I want to keep stressing this, especially for the audience out there. The presumption of Hawaii's sovereignty is on Hawaii's side. there is no presumption of sovereignty on the United States side. There is none. So it has to be reversed. And I think when information is brought out, people start to see that, because then you realize if the United States still needs to perfect their title, that means they don't have title, then the federal recognition becomes irrelevant. That is an internal matter of the United States. That's no different than we're in London talking about federal recognition for the Welsh in Great Britain, created by the United States Congress. Somebody in Great Britain is going to say, that's an American law, doesn't apply here. But to us, we're still grappling with this idea, wait a minute, are we American or are we still Hawaiian? And I think that's attributed to the indoctrination. And that's why information is very important. And I think what Dexter did on that show was, you really showed that you are very well versed with the information. And, because I know you, Dex, you argue these cases in court. So you might say you've been sparring. And you're going toe-to-toe with questions. Yeah, we talk all the time about the judges asking you this. So I think you had an unfair advantage to the rest of the panelists, because I don't think, from what I heard, they were ever put in a position to actually test what they know. Because I don't think they said anything that had any historical relevance other than playing off on today's politics, on beliefs.
Well, well, not only did they not do that, but they were also focusing in on, quote, the monies that's available. The monies from Office of Foreign Affairs, federal monies that they would be able to grapple, and there were other ulterior motives that I believe was coming into play for, Governor Waihee, as well as bringing, trying to, bring into Kanai'olavalu as well as Kauinoa. That was a huge motivational factor on this stuff.
Well, I would say this. First off, I was fortunate in that all I'm doing is presenting information that's always been there.
Yeah.
Right.
And undisputed. So I just happen to be the person that's there in a position to give the rest of the community information that's available. And once they examine the information, I honestly believe they'll come to no other conclusion than the conclusion that I came to on PBS. The second thing, with respect to the monies, and I didn't have an opportunity to say it then, and I'm glad I have the opportunity to say it now, with the monies that they spent on first Kauinoa, and then as well as now Kanai'olavalu, and we're talking anywhere from a minimum of $30 million to upwards of more than $50 million. That money could be better spent on our communities. I know everyone talked about this legislation to provide for the benefits and the protections of our communities. That money could have been better spent, instead of trying to gain signatures from people based on an unlawful status, better suited to go ahead and feed our community, house our community. That's a ton of money that could have been utilized for that purpose alone.
It could also be used to educate our community.
Educate our community,
Educate
that's
our
right.
community
That's
with,
right.
with the information we're talking about.
That's right. I think, you provide us the opportunity, me the opportunity, with less than, just a fraction of the monies. I think we change the community in no time.
Well, it just so happens I just came from a presentation that I gave to the Native Hawaiian Education Council. I was invited to give a talk there because one of its members, Auntie Maggie Hanohano, she works for the DOE. She actually was part of a program where I was teaching DOE teachers, Department of Education teachers, on how to teach Hawaii's history using my history book. So I actually gave a presentation on Ua Maukea, Sovereignty Endures, an overview of the legal and political history of the Hawaiian Islands.
Anyway, there we go. We got a close-up on this.
But I was invited there to present to the council of what I worked with teachers on. I used to be in the Army. Got out of the Guard, and we would have this concept of train the trainers before you train the soldiers. I took that same concept, and instead of concentrating on teach the students, to now teach the teachers to teach the students. So I had them for 18 hours, 3 days, and it was a part of the professional development. So they get 3 professional credits. And I teach not only, the instruction is not only to teach what history is, but also, more importantly, how to teach it. Because we're dealing with indoctrination. So I have to make sure that we need to teach this, not politically, but historically, yeah? Which includes law and politics.
Right.
But don't get political when you're teaching the history. Just lay it out for what it is and encourage questions, you know? Encourage development. And it's okay to make a mistake. And that's what I was sharing with the Native Hawaiian Education Council, and they were shocked. I think the telling statement is that they saw the program for patriotic exercises, which is the program of indoctrination by the Department of Education in 1906. That you cannot deny. How do you fix that? You need to teach the right history. You need to come back to look at what is falsifiable and what were the history books of the Kingdom era, which are in English as well. And I began to speak to that. So education is key. Education is key. I think too many times people are just into sound bites. They want a quick answer. You're not going to get it.
Well, it had to have been a shock to them, especially seeing the indoctrination coming from that started at the DOE level, in 1906, indoctrinating the children, and then now they as teachers now having a sense of, wow, this happened to my kupuna, and then them being teachers in the DOE and being Hawaiian, and now having a sense of responsibility.
And that's the key,
they
responsibility.
now have got to
Right.
correct
Now they got to
this.
fix it.
Yeah.
See, now you know. Now you got to fix it.
Right, just like with myself, becoming aware of the information that was previously available with that, but I was not aware. With that information now comes kuleana. And because of that, my kuleana has been, again, to take this matter to the courts and to address the courts on this information, trying to educate both the courts and my clients, and trying to get the courts to get into compliance. Speaking on some of these other panels, having the opportunity and the honor to do so, again, it's my kuleana to try and persuade the rest of the panel members that what we're doing is correct, what you're doing is unlawful, please reconsider. Like I said, that's why I'm trying to massage Governor Waihee, because, I'm not going to give up hope on any of them yet. I think we all have the opportunity and the responsibility to try to change the minds of all the people. We need to undo the indoctrination.
Right.
So-
Well, I think that's the difficulty in all the work that, all of you have been doing in this, being in the courts, helping people with their homes.
At the university.
And at the university, as well as, enforcement with the police officers, with the sheriffs and so forth, and seeing that, they are family members and so forth, and trying to educate them, and not only educating them, knowing that they understand this, but yet they continue to do the wrong thing.
See, and that's where it gets very sticky
Yeah.
as you keep walking down this road of realizing what actually happened. Because when you have kuleana, that is a sign that you understand what's going on. And that when people now are put in a position, it is not a position to choose the Hawaiian Kingdom or this. That is not what this is about. The Hawaiian Kingdom is a country. That's like saying, choose the United States or this if I'm in California. No, the United States is the country. The Hawaiian Kingdom is the country. We got to get on that. Okay? And if it is the country, then these are the rules that apply to this particular country, and these are the rules that apply to other countries and what is called international law. So when we start to get into the sticky areas of non-compliance to law, notice that it's very different than I'm not agreeing with it. See, because whether you agree or disagree, it's a different matter if you're complying or not complying. And if you're not complying to the law, then there is a rule of law. A rule of law is everyone is equal under the law, and it will be enforced equally. That's the rule of law. So naturally, you're going to be getting into, well, if this is the law, then what kind of law is it? Is it a civil law that you can say, well, just the contract, I can disregard that? Then you may be taken to court later on a civil matter in the right court. Or is this a criminal law? Is there a victim? Have you created a victim out of your ignorance? Did you create a victim out of your arrogance? All that will go toward how you're going to get punished. So when you start to venture into the law, you start to venture into liability. And that is where it gets very sticky. And that's what's happening in the courts, because when people now know the information and know the history, and it is being argued within the courts, and the presumption of continuity is in the Hawaiian Kingdom's favor, not the United States' favor, you are putting the judges, the banks, the attorneys, the law enforcement in a very, very hard position. That position of, what do I do? And if they say, well, I'm just going to do it because I need to do it, but you still violated the rights of a person, are you punishing that person for bringing up the evidence through an attorney? And especially when there is a way to approach this without violating this person's rights. See, that's when you start to get a little sticky, and that's when Dexter, when you're bringing up with the International Criminal Court. These are things that are naturally moving as you move further down this road. Yeah. So at first it begins, wow, I didn't know, to, oh my God, whoa. And then you start to see the liability. We have to be careful, but we still have to malama, yeah? But we have to malama so much where I'm not going to be considered an accessory after the fact. You know, so how do I walk that path? Because now this guy actually just committed a war crime, and I made me look like I'm an accessory because I'm not holding him accountable. You know?
And let me put it to you in this perspective, because after the show, I did see some comments, and I believe I got some favorable comments concerning my participation on the PBS show. I mean, a lot of people in their comments questioned Kanai'olowalo as well as the United States and their claim on their unlawful status. So for those people, what I might suggest is, because they want to participate as well, they want to take some action. So for those people who may have, without their knowledge, signed on to Kanai'olowalo, or may have signed on to Kauinoa without having this information, and now that they have this information, they'd like to know what they should do, my first recommendation would be is to contact the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, ask them to send you a form that allows you to opt out because you no longer want to be part of Kanai'olowalo or Kauinoa, nor do you want them to use your information on any of the OHA registry for Kanai'olowalo's purpose. You can take that into your own hand. That's an individual can take that into their own hand, saying we understand that the laws of occupation or deoccupation is the lawful status. We no longer want to participate in an unlawful status. We want to be in compliance with Hawaiian Kingdom and international law. We no longer want to be part of this Kanai'olowalo roll call or Kauinoa and use of my name for Kanai'olowalo.
See, one thing that Kanai'olowalo ventures into in Kauinoa, with this misinformation being fed, okay, they're getting very close to a war crime called denationalizing the inhabitants of an occupied territory. That's where it's going. Now, what I'm trying to do, and what I would like to do, is get people to understand, first of all, it's not relevant because it's an American law. But what is relevant is Hawaiian law, so we need to get educated and be informed on that. But we also need to keep in mind that we have family and friends involved, but at the same time, you still got crimes that could be committed, so it gets very sticky. It gets very, very sticky. And I am a proponent of education, but after a while, hey, people have made a decision, they're walking down a particular path, accountability is the next issue.
Okay, let me just ask you this in 2 minutes. You got 2 minutes. If I were to come to you and I said, Dr. Sai, I've been getting hit to make a choice. People are asking me, well, I have to decide whether or not I should vote for a democratic government, for a nation within a nation, whether I should have a government like Kanai'olowalo, or I should vote for a government like decolonization, or I should just stay with the state of Hawaii, or go with what Dexter Kayama. How should I vote? What would your response be?
Stand
2
down.
minutes.
Just stand down. Just don't vote. There's nothing to vote on. It's all illegal.
And I would answer the question the same way. You can, first off, if you have the information and you cannot dispute the information we've provided, which is The lawful status is that we are an independent nation under illegal occupation, and the proper restoration should be deoccupation. Then you cannot participate in all of these other processes, which is unlawful. And that those processes are the nation within a nation, federal recognition, because the United States has no lawful claim. So you shouldn't participate in those processes.
Now, when you say shouldn't participate in those processes, it also means everything. You know, so you can't pick this and not that. I mean, if the entire state of Hawaii is unlawful because it was created by Congress limited to its territory, everything's unlawful. So my suggestion would be stand down, reassess the situation, and get educated before moving forward. The key here is education. It's education. It's not picking and choosing. It's already chosen. Always occupied. We can't change that.
And to get the education, where would they go?
Now, when the actual plan to deoccupy is instituted, I can assure you that the plans are there. But the plans don't mean anything if people are not educated on what's supposed to take place. Yeah?
And also, to get educated, you can contact me. At the end of the show, you're going to see my phone number, or you can go to hawaiiankingdom.org/blog, or you can get to laulimatitle.com. I'd like to thank my guests for joining me tonight, Dr. Keanu Sai, as always, and Attorney Dexter Kayama. This was a great show, and our 57 minutes just flew by. Mahalo, you guys. I really thank you very much. Everyone, mahalo. Dane, good job. Ahui ho, everybody.